Welcome to our first Clean and Prosperous California webinar featuring Dr. Kyle Meng. Thanks for joining us, Kyle. We will just do a few intro slides and then hand the mic over to Kyle to present his new economic research. And I will share my screen to share those slides. Okay, is that a good size? All right, great. So yeah, Kyle will present today on using cap and trade revenues to lower electricity prices. Before we hand over to Kyle, let me just introduce the new nonprofit that we've just created, which is Clean and Prosperous California. So we're a newly created 501c3. Our mission is to secure a clean and prosperous California. I'll go full screen here. That might be better. We examine carbon pricing through an economic lens by synthesizing scientific evidence from the literature and using economic thinking to produce new research. Economic thinking facilitates smart design for California's cap and trade programs so that climate action can be leveraged to solve a variety of statewide problems, such as the affordability crisis, devastating wildfires, and budget deficits. So the role really of this new nonprofit is to elevate and create economic thinking in the context of cap and trade. We think that's appropriate. If you want to look at the performance of the cap and trade program, economists should have a say, kind of like if you're going in for heart surgery, you wouldn't want a podiatrist working on your heart. You want a heart surgeon working on your heart. So this is who we are, Clean and Prosperous Washington. This is our leadership team. I'll note everyone's volunteer now, including myself, although hopefully I'll cut a paycheck soon. But our board is all volunteer. So Dr. Joe Nation is a board member. He's couldn't make it today because he's abroad, but Joe is a professor of practice in public policy at Stanford University and a principal co-author of AB 32. We have Alicia Robinson here today, the CEO of Elevate Climate and a former carbon markets and white collar attorney.
And Clayton, I actually will interrupt you since you've called on me. We can't really see this slide that well. There is a kind of notification blocking the screen and we're not in full presenter mode. That's better.
Is that just better?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Full screen clearly did not work well. Let's just keep it like this then. So yeah, thanks, Alicia. And then our last volunteer board member is Dr. Emily Wimberger, who's here today. Thanks for joining, Emily, managing partner at Huanani Partners and former chief economist at the Air Resources Board. I'm the executive director of Clean and Prosperous California, and I have expertise in cap and trade programs, having worked on most cap and trade programs on most continents over the last 15 years. And I'm excited to bring that economic expertise to California. So back to Kyle. So Kyle is an associate professor at UC Santa Barbara with appointments at the Bren School and also the Department of Economics. He's formerly a senior climate economist at the Council of Economic Advisors under the Biden White House. And we are really excited to have him here today to present his research, which is hot off the presses and very well timed on using cap and trade revenues to lower electricity prices. I'll just make one note of how timely this is in response to the governor's proposed trailer bill language, a highlight of which was $60 billion returned through electricity sector customers through the California Climate Credit through 2045. This is a key topic of Kyle's research, and we look forward to hearing his economic insights. So thanks for joining us, Kyle. And I will note again that Clean and Prosperous will be running these webinars on a weekly basis. So you can expect more economic thinking and new economic analysis advertised by us. So without further ado, Kyle, I will switch over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you to everyone at Clean and Prosperous California. Very happy to be here. Very happy to present something that we released on Monday. And also very glad to see on this call a lot of old friends and new. Okay. I'm going to do this weird thing they call the Wizard of Oz effect. I'm going to show you slides, and then you're going to see my disembodied head up top. Hopefully that won't be too distracting. So a couple of days ago, we released a new analysis from my research group. Here you see Santa Barbara, the Environmental Markets Lab, MLab. Many of you guys have probably engaged with us in different capacities over the years. But we felt like this was a good moment to tackle what we thought was a pretty central issue here, which is the kind of confluence of both, emerging and intensifying discussions about the reauthorization of California's cap and trade program, as well as in the background, this concern about high energy prices and in particular electricity prices in the state, and whether or not the interaction of these two provides an opportunity for us to think about some new solutions. Before I start, the work that I'm presenting is joint with a bunch of MLab colleagues here, UC Santa Barbara. In particular, my colleague Shahid Prasad, who's really the engine behind a lot of this analysis and built the online calculator that I will kind of show you on a little bit, and hopefully will be useful in different policy debates. But we also got a lot of really wonderful support from our core MLab team here, our executive director, Michaela Clements, and our operations lead, Sarah Erickson and Aaron O'Reilly. So this is really very much a team effort in getting this out in a timely manner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the stage a little bit and start with what I think are three really important facts about climate policy here in California. These are, I think, probably going to be nothing new for many of you, but I just want to level set a little bit in terms of thinking about the moment that we're in and what what are the opportunities. So the first is that, as many of you know, California has very, very ambitious climate targets. It's always had ambitious climate targets. It was ambitious back in 2006 when AB 32 was passed. It was ambitious yet again, a little under 10 years ago when that was extended. And California has largely met these ambitious targets. So as many of you know, very famously a few years ago, it met its 2020 targets 5 or 6 years early, right? These are targets that remember, for those of us who are like old enough, I've been working on this for over 2 decades. Like, remember when AB 32 was passed, no one was like, oh, we were never going to do this. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, we did it, and we did it early. Okay, so I think that is something to celebrate. But of course, if you look at this line as we're moving forward to thinking about 2030 and beyond, we're talking about greater ambition. I personally think it's quite realistic given where we are, but I think it's good to recognize that we've done a lot, but there's a lot more to do moving forward. So fact one. Second one is that there are many pieces to California's climate kind of basket of climate policies, but the kind of cornerstone of it, you can call it backstop, you can call it cornerstone, but a really central piece of it is its world-leading cap and trade market. This is the world's second largest climate carbon market after compliance market. It's importantly a compliance market, not just a voluntary market, after the EU ETS. As an environmental and climate economist, I often teach about kind of like carbon pricing and what we know and what we don't know. And we almost always turn to California as an example of how do you design smart policy, and how do we think about policies that are cost effective in terms of dealing with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This program has worked in the sense that it has driven down greenhouse gas emissions. So the figure on the left is a published paper in the Journal of Public Economics that came out in 2023 with a former co-author of former student of mine, Dane Hernandez-Cortex, who's now a professor at Arizona State University, where we looked at looking back retrospectively on the performance of the cap and trade market in the first 5 years, look at what happens to greenhouse gas emissions, local air pollution, and their disparities. And this figure taken from that study showed that for the facilities for which we can cleanly isolate the effect of cap and trade, we detect a very notable decline in greenhouse gas emissions due to the program. What you see is that before the program, which is shown in this dotted line, emissions were rising for those facilities that ended up being regulated in the program. And then thereafter, after the introduction of the program, they started declining. So cap and trade has lowered emissions, number one. And then on the right is also generated a lot of revenue, which is really going to be the focus of our conversation today. Something of upwards of tens of billions of dollars cumulatively over the last 10 years have been generated for various different fiscal needs for the state, including many climate priorities for the state. The third fact is that despite all this success and the fact that we need to do more moving forward, one of the major headwinds that California faces moving forward from a policy design standpoint is the fact that in many settings, our energy prices, or in particular our electricity prices, are too high. So in everywhere else in the country and maybe the world, we often say, well, we need to make energy prices more expensive for conservation reasons, okay? But actually here in California, electricity prices are in some cases double what we think it should be, even accounting for all the damages associated with generating electricity, from climate damages to local air pollution damages. The figure here on the left comes from the most recent IMAC report that was released a few months ago. On the right, showing the marginal social cost. So this is what economists think should be the price of electricity, accounting for all the social damages associated with it, right? And on the left are the prices that we actually see. This is actually from PG&E, from all the different things that end up being loaded onto our volumetric rates. The figure on the right is a figure from an NRDC study from a few months ago, showing that a lot of this price increase that we've been seeing in recent years is largely on the distribution side of electricity sector. And largely that distribution we think is coming in from, for example, increases liabilities that the IOUs, the electric utilities, are paying for wildfire prevention and risks associated with wildfire. So we're in a situation where, in fact, electricity prices are too high, and that is providing a lot of headwind in terms of our efforts to essentially electrify the economy, right? So too high electricity prices end up slowing down EV adoption, heat pump adoption of other electrical appliances, and so forth. And so the question really that we have before us is, what can we do to try to lower some of these the electricity prices across the state? Okay, so that's really the crux of the analysis here. The total value of the cap and trade market in terms of just the value of the cap in 2023 is about a little over $7 billion. 6.3 of that is collected in terms of permit revenue. It goes to many different places. And of that, currently 1.2 billion, it goes to what's called the Electricity Residential California Climate Credit, CCC for short, which is the kind of like the two lump sum annual payments that utility consumers get as a reimbursement for the auction revenue. What we're going to do is a very simple exercise. We're going to ask, what if you took that money, instead of having it as a lump sum reimbursement, actually use it to lower retail electricity prices for consumers, households served by the major electric utilities? Now, it doesn't have to be just that 1.2 billion. It could be that. It could be other pots of money that are coming out of the carbon market, or it could actually be for any state funds. And in fact, what we're going to show you is an analysis that allows you to kind of choose your own venture, if you will, pick whatever state funds you want and figure out what that resulting price decline would be. We also think about different subsidy design programs, either to all households to all months, maybe to all households just during the summer months when electricity prices are highest, or maybe just to lower income households, for example, to try to get more out of the revenue that you can get in terms of reduced electricity prices. How do we do this? We're definitely not the first to do this. In fact, there are folks here on the call that have done similar analyses. There's a forthcoming analysis from NRDC. Michael Wara at Stanford has done something similar back in December. And then there's a CPUC calculation as well on this question. Again, using the climate credit to reduce or other sources to reduce electricity prices. I would say the two kind of extensions that we have in ours is that we're going to add a little bit of kind of more economics into the analysis, in the sense that we're going to just basically have a downward sloping demand curve, which means if you lower electricity prices, electricity consumption is going to increase. And so that changes the degree in which a given amount of money how far a given amount of money can go in terms of subsidizing electricity. But we're going to have the ability to think about different, essentially, price responses by consumers. And then the other is that we're going to basically not just provide like a single policy suggestion, but we're going to give you a whole continuum of possible funding amounts that you can consider and that you can then explore what the resulting emissions intensity, the resulting electricity price change would be. For example, it doesn't have to be just a 1.2 billion. It could be that plus, some GGRF or some free allowances given to industries or other pots of money for the state. If you really want to kind of ramp up the affordability benefits of the subsidy. And so all of this is going to be in the calculator that I'm going to showcase later. And then we use a lot of very current data from 2023. We want to highlight that this is not a literal forecast of the future, but we're really just an illustration of taking most recent data to think about what this will look like as an illustration. It's very hard to forecast a lot of things that would change moving on into the future. Okay, so just show you kind of in terms of baseline, here's the data, that very simple data that goes into our analysis. The map on the left shows you the service territories of the 3 major utilities that are in our that we're studying, that we have data for: PG&E, SCE, and SDG&E. On the right, the table shows you the average retail electricity prices paid by all households, as well as separately for just households, lower income households that fall under the CARE program. These are, this is not all of California, but this is about 11.3 million households. So this is a very large share of the households in California. Okay, what are our main results? So the first thing we want to show you is, what if we just took as an illustrative example the 1.2 billion currently from the climate credit and consider 3 subsidy designs. The first is, what if we just took that money, and instead of sending it in terms of 2 monthly payments, we just said we're just going to lower electricity prices for all households served, with 11.3 million households served by those 3 utilities. Okay, what we find is that you would lower electricity prices by about 4 to 7%, and this is all using a short-run elasticity of demand. So this is a downward sloping demand curve that essentially would not take into account kind of longer-term durable investments that households might make in response to lower prices. Okay, so 4 to 7%. Now, if you were to, this is now for every single month of the year. If you were to do that, but instead of doing it for every single month, you were just to concentrate it in July, August, and September, the 3 months that are hottest in the state, and where we know electricity demand is highest because of need for air conditioning, particularly in the Central Valley, you get more. You get to take that 1.2 billion and concentrate it into those 3 months, and you get an amped up price reductions for those 3 months of about 13 to 19%. Okay. Alternatively, you can also say, well, what we're really going to focus on are the lower income households for which their monthly expenditures, right, energy expenditures is a larger share of their income. These are the households for which we worry most about in terms of higher electricity prices. What if we took that 1.2 and just lowered electricity rates for every month of the year, but for just those households? This is about, I think, like 20 to 30% of households served by these 3 major utilities. You get more. You get a price reduction for those households of 27 to 44%. Okay, so this is just, again, an illustration. We can think about other, not just the 1.2 billion from the climate credit, but we can think about other sources of funding. Again, this need not be limited to just carbon market, cap and trade revenue, right? But it could be for any. But as an illustration, just to give you a sense, the first column here is what the CCC is for electricity for each of the 3 major utilities. This is basically underlying the analysis I've shown you up to this point. The second one is what happens, the amount of money that's currently given through the natural gas credit. So the residential climate credit, but for natural gas, not for electricity. And then the third column is another source of funding for small business climate credit. The fourth column is all the free allowances that's currently given to industrial emitters. And the fifth column is all the money that's given out to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but now divided by the share, essentially the share of emissions across the 3 utilities. Okay, so just to give you a sense of what this will look like. What we think is ultimately helpful, and we hopefully we love feedback for this, is to not just necessarily think about one source of money, but to think about different amounts of money from many different sources, and for different stakeholders to explore what the resulting electricity price reduction will look like. So that is essentially what's captured in this figure. So the x-axis or horizontal axis here is different amounts of money that will be spent to subsidize retail electricity prices. Okay, the climate credit is 1.2 billion overall, but now divided, into what will be given for PG&E. That's the x-axis. And on the y-axis, we have just the percent change in retail electricity prices for that amount of money given. We're showing you 3 lines. The line in blue is that first subsidy design, all months, all households. The line in red is all households, but just summer months. And the yellow line is all months, but just low-income households as defined by the CARE program. The last thing we're showing you here in this figure is the red dot, which is the social marginal cost. This is what, at least by our best estimates, what economists think electricity prices should be, taking into account all the kind of concerns and damages from climate change and from local air pollution. And so conceptually, this is the prices for which you don't necessarily want to go below, but for which, again, because of how high our electricity prices are right now, we are way above. Okay, so this is what it looks like for PG&E. We have something similar for South Coast Edison, SCE, and then we have something similar for SDG&E. Okay, we can also think about what this will look like for different behavioral responses, right? Both no response, assuming essentially consumers don't change their quality under lower prices. So this is consistent with the Stanford or the NRDC, and I think the CPUC analysis. That is shown here by the dashed line, or a more kind of greater response, like long run elasticities for which consumers are now adopting household appliances, as shown here in the dotted line right here. Okay, so and so we can do that for the 3 utilities as well. So finally, what we could do is we could just take this and say, well, what if, we have a calculator to explore these different options. So the last thing I will show you is a calculator that my colleague Shrahe put together. So these are the graphs that come straight from the analysis, okay? And what you could do is you can say, well, for what I want to do is think about not the 1.2 billion that's coming in from the climate credit, but maybe I'm thinking about something that sums up to 2 billion, right? And so you can put that in, and what the calculator does is then say, well, how do we allocate that by historical emissions across the 3 utilities, and then calculate what the percent retail price change would be for all households, just the summer months, or for just CARE households during all months, right? And showing you essentially where you fall on this graph, which is shown here by the dotted line. So again, what we've done already for the CCC in the paper, but now you can put in essentially any amount that you want to explore, okay? Alternatively, you can also say, well, instead of thinking in terms of how much money to spend, let's target a certain amount of percent price drops. What if we really want to say we want to just lower prices by, on average, 25% across households? How much money would that take to do so? So this is the inverse problem, okay? And so the calculator also allows that flexibility, that functionality, where you can say, I just want to think about 25% drop on average. How much money are we talking about, okay, that would achieve this across the different designs, okay? Again, we hope that this is a tool that will be helpful to the broader community out there as we, in the coming months, weigh different considerations, different design considerations over cap and trade design. Okay, let me just conclude. I have one last slide. So in conclusion, one thing we want to highlight here is that we think there's an opportunity right now to think about the reauthorization conversation on the cap and trade program as both a way to think about essentially affordability in two dimensions. One is that because this is a market-based policy that is designed to deliver to meet California's climate targets in the most cost-effective policy, in some sense, you can think of it as, given our ambitious climate target, this is the most affordable way. Cap and trade allows for the most affordable way in which we can meet these targets. The second is that it also generates revenue, and that revenue can be used to essentially lower too high electricity prices. And we're just giving you an example of how to do that as illustration of just using the current climate credit, the 1.2 billion, it will lower prices by about 4 to 7% if applied to all households in all months. For just summer months, it would be 13 to 19% of retail price reduction. And then for all months, but for just low-income households as defined by CARE, it will be a much larger reduction by 27 to 44%. Again, this is an illustration. The calculator that Shrahe has built will allow you for more flexibility to think about different, essentially, funding sources that could emerge over the next few months. I want to highlight that we can also think about other subsidy designs. That is not kind of in our core analysis, but we could readily extend that as well, where you can think about different targeted subsidies to other populations or locations or times a day. And then the last thing, again, just to emphasize the caveat here is that there's a lot of uncertainty here. This is using recent data to think about what these price reductions will look like, but they are in some sense not a forecast of the future, because for that we really need accurate forecasts of what future electricity prices would be, consumption, cap and trade permit prices, and as well as the overall cap. A lot of this stuff, of course, is subject to negotiations right now. All this information is online at our MLab website. We have a one-page executive summary. We have a full policy paper brief with methods and data. We also have an online calculator that I pointed you to. And of course, if anyone who can't find it, just send me an email and I can point you to the link. And then all our data and code is publicly available on a GitHub repository for anyone who wants to explore this for themselves. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you for the opportunity and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kyle. Let's see. So got a couple questions via email and a couple questions in the Q&A. I should have said this at the beginning, but the recording of today will be made available. These slides from today will be made available, and we will be emailing all participants that information. So the first question relates to the economic concept of elasticity. So can we just go back to how you use elasticities in this analysis and how that differentiates you from other similar studies? So starting all the way back at, please define elasticity for a non-economist.
Yeah, no, good question. So it's just basically just the notion that if you lower electricity prices, people would consume more electricity. And we have empirical evidence from California of what that will look like, both in the short run, meaning like if you were to change it from year to year, or longer term changes in which, changes enduring and people make, investments as a result of it. The reason why we think this is important is that if you did a more kind of straightforward analysis, which is that just take that 1.2 billion and just divide it by the amount of consumption right now, you would get a price change. But that price change doesn't take into the fact that people are going to be, with the lower prices, consuming more electricity. And so then the problem for the utilities that you get that wrong, you would actually end up having not enough money to finance the program, right? Because you thought consumption was going to be the same and you're going to be paying the subsidy times that amount of consumption of kilowatt hours. But in fact, consumption has increased. And so then the problem is like you run out of money. And so to taking into account that the fact that people would actually consume more under lower prices is important for like essentially the solvency of the program, such that the IOUs don't run out of money in order to implement this.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, so accounting for the elasticities makes for a more realistic projection. Yeah, great. Okay, let me go to, I guess the next question has to do with kind of, there's two related ones, and I think this really speaks to, I take this as well, okay, we'll go to a definitional question. So in your presentation, you use kind of CARE as a way to define low income. So from a methodological perspective, can we go back to that and just elaborate on why choose CARE compared to alternative approaches? And yeah, I think that's fine for the question. Yeah.
No, very good question. I have no particular views on the CARE definition, whether it's the right one or whether it's not. It's part of the challenge, as I understand it, and I'm sure there are others on the call who know this much better, is an implementation issue, right? So in order for this to happen, the utility needs some notion of being disadvantaged or being low income. The current operating definition is through the CARE program. And so that's kind of what we lean on to, and just says like, if you want to think about it, this is the information that the utilities and CPUC are already collecting, and so they could implement that subsidy through that definition for the data they collect. I know, and many of you on the call know this even better than I do, that there's like a working group, there's a lot of work going on at the state to think about other definitions, in particular over the whole, like fixed fee debate over graduated fixed fees for solar. And so the work that comes out of that working group could go into this definition, and could then be implemented. So this is our choice of care was not because we thought of it as being the right thing, but really because we thought, well, this is something that utilities currently collect that they could then implement readily. But of course, when new definitions come up, they're kind of, better measures of income and need, then we can definitely apply it through those programs as well.
Yeah, makes good sense. Thank you, Kyle. I think I'll try to group up a few questions together just related to really the kind of relative and absolute magnitudes of reductions in electricity prices. So one question is phrased as like kind of what's a meaningful reduction in electricity bills from your perspective? And then there's another set of questions of why lower electricity bills for IOUs or regulated utilities. And I think this may speak to how economists think about the price with the social cost and where the price is now. So kind of two questions on reductions, kind of a practical perspective and the economist perspective.
Yeah, so the reason why I keep saying that like electricity prices are too high in California is because um, even if, like I said, this notion of social marginal cost, this is the notion that goes into like the social cost of carbon and so forth, which is like there is a price that we want for electricity that takes into account all the damages from climate change, and air pollution damages associated with the coal pollution of that. Most places in the country, we are way below that. That's why we want to essentially make have regulation to kind of make energy more expensive to force to get the economy to decarbonize. Here in California, it's the opposite. Our prices are too high. Okay, and when they're too high, it means that uh, together with the fact that electricity is actually now the pathway through which we're going to do most of our decarbonization, we think, again, through EVs, through heat pumps, through electrical appliances, that what happens is that it really puts a lot of headwind into electrifying things. I'll just give you a quick example. I'm not fully in the EV world yet, but I did when we moved back from DC after my time in the White House, came back to California and bought a plug-in hybrid that had like 25 miles. And within the first month, our electricity bill tripled. And I like actually sat down and did the math. I was like, so sure this is cheaper than running my like ICE car in terms of like, just like monthly energy expenses. So really, I think being able to lower electricity prices in California will be really important to accelerate a lot of this adoption that we know and we know we need in the state in order to meet our climate targets.
A quick follow-on question that we had emailed to us is like, are there any particular scenarios that drive EV adoption more than others? I think you're talking about the electricity price channel. But are there different geographies or utilities where lowering the electricity price particularly accelerates EV adoption or other forms of electrification?
Very good question. We don't have an answer for that right now, but it's something we're exploring. So one of my colleagues here at UCSB's M Lab is an energy engineer by name of Ranjit Deshmukh. Ranjit and I have done earlier work uh, with CARB on refineries and decarbonization and air pollution disparity consequences of California's refineries. We've been talking about taking some of these estimates that you just saw, which is very simple. It's just showing electricity prices changes, but then thinking about if in different places for different households, what would that mean for what we think our best guess at what that would do for EV adoption, for example. So we haven't done that yet. We have a lot of the pieces for that analysis, but if there's enough demand from stakeholders and all of you and policymakers, that's something we have the machinery to explore.
Okay, great. I think we have one more question on kind of the proposals of GGRF on electricity prices. And thanks for dealing with kind of the rapid fire here so skillfully. So I think the last question in this context, I'll combine to, I'll actually kind of ask my own, like, I've been looking at the cap and trade program long enough where there was a strong justification in the beginning of the program that the California climate credit should be kind of lump sum instead of volumetric. So can you explain kind of the logic between switching to a volumetric, which I think you partially covered, but we might as well do this explicitly. And then a similar question is why focus on reducing rates when fixed costs are the primary problem? So
Yeah.
how do you think about those two questions?
Yeah, let me do it in reverse. I mean, this is a very good question. It's like, why are prices so high? If we think it's because of, all the wildfire liabilities that the utilities are paying, why not just go after that problem directly? And I'm very sympathetic to that view. And in fact, one of the things we were trying to do is trying to figure out, like, well, what do we know about how much different investments made either by the state or by the utilities reduce wildfire liability and damages would translate, would how much you get for that money, and then how much would that translate to lower electricity prices? The reality is that we actually don't, at least as far as we could explore it, the limited time we have, we don't have very good estimates of that. So this is still like something that we're trying to understand a little better. I have a hunch that you get much more bang for your buck by going to the root cause. But I can't say anything confidently about that right now. And then the other thing also is that there's also, I think, some questions about if you were to do that, you also need to ensure that CPUC and other regulatory agencies, ensure that those benefits are passed through in terms of lower electricity prices to households when those investments are made. And there probably is different forms of oversight for that to occur, but that's an extra wrinkle that would complicate the matter. To your first point, Clayton, about why do we talk about this now? So in fact, there was a brief period, I think in 2014 or 2015, where a few of these utilities actually took that credit and used it to reduce volumetric prices. So this is not unprecedented. It has happened, and it happened for about a 2-year period until some of you know this detail better than I do, but a piece of legislation that basically eliminated that possibility. I think this phenomenon of electricity prices being too high, I don't think was there in 2006 when AB 32 was passed. And it's a more recent phenomenon. I think that's one thing. And the other thing, this is more of a kind of a behavioral or even like a political economy story, which is like, I don't know about you guys, but like most people I talk to have no idea what the climate credit is. Like they don't, and so there is this hope that if you are able to have electricity bills every month where you show, not just like twice a year, but every month show the portion of your, volumetric rate that is lowered by this credit, that actually generate more visibility and hence support for the program, and then of course more broadly for the cap and trade um, policy in general. And so there is both like an economic argument for it, and even though this is not my main realm, but I do think there's a political argument for shifting to something that's more visible and more regular.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Maybe we can transition away from kind of the pricing details to this is more of a regulatory question, so I'm happy to hop in after your initial response, Kyle. But from Nick Roy at Resources for the Future, are the different policy design options explored here best implemented in the current legislative reauthorization process or in the future rulemaking from CARB?
That is not something I'm comfortable or know enough to speak to. So, but I'm sure there are others on the call who would.
I'm only slightly more comfortable. I will not answer which is the best approach. I will just note that I think Kyle's analysis kind of applies here in terms of just the pot of money is can come from anywhere. And so if one wanted to do this through the rulemaking process instead of the legislative process, so CARB instead of the legislature, there is an existing kind of California climate credit program under the rulemaking. The way that roughly works is that the utilities allocations are more or less hard coded into the regulation. And since the vast majority of their allowance allocation goes towards the California climate credit, you could just increase the utilities allowance allocation in the rule and thereby expand the California climate credit. Under that rule, yeah, it's worth noting, and this was a comment kind of down below. The California climate credit does not accrue to kind of the investor portion of the IOUs. This is like pretty closely regulated by the PUC and CARB. So there is a regulatory option, and it doesn't have to be either or. You could kind of have some money from the GGRF on the legislative side and some increase in the California climate credit by increased free allocations to the utilities. And it's way above my pay grade to answer the question, which is best, but there are more than one lever to do to lower electricity prices using cap and trade. All right. Thank you, Nick. Two kind of, I think, questions about the results. One is a clarification, one's kind of a sensitivity analysis. First question is, how much would electricity prices rise for the rest of the population if the CCC was narrow to care recipients? I want to ask the second question, Kyle, because I think that's actually kind of a complicated question potentially. So I'll let you answer that one.
It is a complicated question, so I'm gonna like take a shortcut, and I think to a first approximation, it won't do anything. I mean, the reason why is meaning it won't do anything to electricity prices for non-care customers. Now, why do I hedge and when I said that? It's because like in theory, you are going to increase consumption of electricity, which means that you might have to produce more electricity and so forth, and so therefore costs might go up. Maybe it depends on what the marginal generator is going to be. If it's solar, then probably not by that much. So I think it's reasonable to say that it probably won't do much to electricity prices for non-care customers.
Makes sense. Thank you. Okay, we're getting to the end of the questions. This was the sensitivity analysis oriented question. So how might results for municipal utilities such as SMUD differ from this analysis?
I don't think they will be fundamentally different. And part of the reason why we couldn't do that was just we just didn't have the data. And also because we kind of benchmark the analysis to the CCC, and the CCC goes through the 6 utilities. So it goes through the 6 utilities, of which we only could get the data that we needed for the 3 big ones. And then the other, like the munis and so forth, we just don't have that data in general. At least we didn't, but maybe others can point us to data sources. But the analysis fundamentally wouldn't be that different, provided that we could get that data. Basically, we need like current consumption data and current price data, on average. No.
Makes sense. And then last, I'm sure one or two will sneak in, but last question for now, what about electricity cost of commercial and industrial customers? Don't we need to electrify them as well and need them for support of cap and trade reauthorization?
Yes. So again, I would say that in theory, like you could have done the same analysis for commercial and industrial users as well. There are more complications besides like harder to get data, because again, the complication being like some of those facilities also produce their own electricity on site, and so it's more complicated, but the same logic, I guess you can say, will carry through as well.
Yep, great. Okay, two pretty technical questions to round us out, and then Emily, I'll turn to you and/or I for any additional questions. Although Kyle's done a great job answering quite a number of questions. The first question I think kind of goes to the abatement response that's expected from different income groups. So the question is, do we know that lowering bills from disadvantaged communities will drive additional greenhouse gas reductions? And I'll just broaden that out and say, do we expect different abatement sensitivities by geography, income group, etc.?
Yeah, very good question. Alludes to this potential extension analysis that I spoke with earlier about thinking of what would lower electricity prices do in terms of driving, EV adoption, heat pump adoption, and so forth. I don't have an answer to that, but I will say that, there are many things going on right now in terms of renewable adoption that's changing the landscape. A lot of it, unfortunately, being driven by what's coming on in Washington. Um, but I do think that in California, there's like, if you think about like something like EVs, there's like lowering the cost of buying an EV, and then there's like lowering the cost of electricity, and then a third is like building charging stations. Like those are the three things, right, you need to do in order to spur EV adoption. My hunch right now is that here in California, the biggest hurdle is probably the too high electricity prices. Um, and so this is really trying to get at that problem. How would that affect differential adoption for different populations in different parts of the state? We don't have an answer to that just yet.
Great. Thank you. I feel like we just watched boot camp. Kyle go through a boot camp process. So well done, Kyle. I think you answered all like 15 questions in total. Yeah, so I'll ask one which perked my ears kind of just when when we were going back to the kind of the lump sum versus volumetric question. So not quite a well-formed question, but um I guess there's the first step of just lowering bills, and then there's the second step of turning this from lump sum to volumetric, um, as read on the bill or as implemented. Do you how much do you care about the former, like how much the bill is lowered versus how the bill is lowered, volumetric versus lump sum? And if that's not a clear question, let me know. But that's uh, teasing that apart might be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. Uh, I mean, maybe I can rephrase it in at least the way I think of it in two ways, which is like, I do think we're in a moment where taking this money and lowering volumetric rates is useful because of these too high electricity prices. Um, and then there's a question of, how do you present it such that people are aware of this? And that's, again, outside my area of expertise, but my hypothesis is that something that's more visible and more regular would generate, better understanding, or at least familiarity with this use of these funds than has been the case to date.
Yeah, makes good sense. I will just note in transit, Emily, I'm going to give you the last question. But in transition, I'll also note that in response to Edric's question, Varia from PG&E had a response, and I will also add some commercial and industrial customers get free allocation based on their output, not all. So output-based allocation acts as a carbon price with a product subsidy. So output-based allocation kind of blunts the carbon price for the sectors receiving them. So Edric, your question about does electricity costs impact commercial and industrial? Yes. Depending on those subsectors, they may also be receiving output-based allocation. So I think you got to look at this at a sector by sector basis. And electricity use is not their only way of increasing or emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's a great question and requires kind of a sector by sector analysis. All right. Thank you for that note. Emily, over to you for the last question.
Yeah, and thank you, Kyle. This has been great, and you did some rapid fire questions. I guess my question for you is, this is obviously a really timely and topical issue in California. You had sort of mentioned extensions and issues that you were interested in looking at. I think the calculator is a great way for people to sort of play around and get more information. Do you have any of the sort of like next steps planned in this analysis or this line of work?
Yeah, very quick question. I mean, Shai and I and the whole team, we kind of put this together pretty quickly, and we see this as hopefully useful to all of you, and at this beginning of this process, but we're definitely open to iterating and expanding it as different considerations come in. So right now, you can go to the MLab website, you can go to the calculator, you can put in different dollar amounts and figure out how much emissions would fall. Electricity prices would fall across the 3 IOUs for these 3 different subsidy schemes. We are so at least we have the flexibility now of saying, well, it's not just 1.2 billion, it's 2 billion, it's 3 billion, 4 billion, or less than that. Like, we have the flexibility for people to explore those options. If there is interest, one thing we could do is think about different targeting of the subsidies to different populations, to different geographies. And so again, open call to anyone to just email me and say, like, this would be interesting to explore, that would be interesting to explore. And provided that we could do it and there's enough demand, that's something we could do in the next iteration of the work. And then there's all these questions about, well, what are the actual emissions and other kind of consequences, adoption consequences of lower prices? Again, that is something that if there's interest in it, we could try to overlay that machinery. It'll be harder, but that's something that we could explore. So those are just some areas that we can explore. And again, everything that we've done, everything that I'm showing you is all that code, all that data is on a GitHub repository. You guys can see everything that we've done. You guys can find all our mistakes and tell us where we gone wrong. Like, it's all open source. So feel free to reach out to us and tell us both what we got wrong, but also where we can improve and build in new features as needed as these policy debates evolve.
Thank you, Kyle. And on that note, we'll share my email address and we will send everyone who attended Kyle's landing page with his analysis email address, GitHub repository. Kyle, I'm sure no one will find a mistake. Good work always is rewarded with more work. So I'm sure you'll just get a bunch of requests for extensions. And thank you for joining us on our first webinar. This is a excellent way to kick things off and a pleasure to interact with an economist who's also very good at communications. So thank you for your excellent work. And to all of the participants, we hope to see you at our kind of weekly webinars throughout the summer. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Take care. Bye.